On the afternoon of April 19th, 1991, in Bristol Township, Pennsylvania, 12-year-old David Hibbs stepped off his school bus with excitement. Clutched in his hand was his honor roll certificate, something he could not wait to share with his mother, Joy Hibbs. But as he approached the back of his house, his excitement quickly turned into fear. Thick black smoke was pouring from the rear door. His mother was nowhere in sight. David immediately ran to a neighbor's home, shouting for help. After alerting them, he turned back toward the house, desperate to reach his mother. But before he could go inside, a neighbor physically held him back. David resisted, kicking and struggling, unwilling to accept that he could not help her. Firefighters soon arrived at the scene. As emergency crews worked to contain the flames, David was placed in the back of an ambulance, separated from the chaos unfolding just feet away. Inside the smoke-filled home, responders made a devastating discovery. The body of 35-year-old Joy Hibbs, found in her son's bedroom. Initially, investigators believed Joy had died in the fire, but that changed quickly. The medical examiner's findings revealed a far more disturbing truth. Joy had not died from smoke inhalation or burns. She had been stabbed 5 times. Her rib cage had been crushed. Evidence of strangulation was also present. These brutal injuries indicated that she had been murdered before the fire started. Authorities concluded the fire had been intentionally set to conceal the crime. What began as a presumed accidental blaze was now an active homicide investigation. The scene left more questions than answers, and the quiet neighborhood of Bristol Township was shaken by the horrifying discovery of a mother's violent death. Before tragedy struck, Joy and Charlie Hibbs lived a peaceful, family-centered life. They met as high school sweethearts in Florida, quickly forming a bond that led to marriage soon after graduation. Together, they built a life rooted in love and stability. Eventually, they settled in Bristol Township, Pennsylvania, where they raised their 2 children, Angie and David. Charlie worked in construction, providing for the family, while Joy pursued a career as a medical assistant. At home, she was a devoted mother, engaged, nurturing, and deeply involved in her children's lives. Their home was filled with warmth and laughter, much of it preserved in family home videos taken by Charlie over the years. The couple's love for one another was evident. Their daughter Angie recalled how clearly they loved each other. It was something visible, not just in gestures or routines, but in the way they interacted and supported one another. David, too, held strong memories of his parents sharing activities. They both enjoyed fishing, spending time outdoors, and riding motorcycles, Joy riding on the back with Charlie at the wheel. This section highlights a family rooted in connection and shared joy. The Hibbs home was not marked by conflict or chaos, but by stability, routine, and affection. Understanding who Joy was, an attentive mother, a loving wife, and a kind-hearted woman, provides important emotional context. It reinforces a devastating weight of her loss and what her family endured in the aftermath of her violent death. April 19th, 1991, began like any other day for the Hibbs family in Bristol Township, Pennsylvania. That morning, Joy Hibbs spent time with her 12-year-old son David and the family's new puppy. It was a simple, quiet start filled with the small joys of daily life. After enjoying the morning together, Joy sent David and her 16-year-old daughter Angie off to school. Once her children had left, Joy continued with her daily routine. She made a trip to the bank to withdraw cash, followed by grocery shopping. By approximately 11 a.m., she had returned home. Around that same time, a pastor and his assistant from a local Baptist church arrived to speak with Joy. Their visit was brief and uneventful. They left the house by 11:45 a.m. Both individuals later provided verifiable alibis that accounted for their whereabouts following their visit, and they were not considered suspects. One of the most crucial pieces of physical evidence came from David's bedroom. During the fire, a clock in the room stopped working. Frozen at exactly 12:54 p.m., investigators concluded that the fire had reached that part of the house around that time. Based on this, they determined that Joy had likely been murdered in the narrow 1-hour window between 11:50 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Joy may have known her killer or willingly opened the door. Her wallet, however, was found empty in the living room. raising the possibility of robbery as a motive. Additionally, a witness reported seeing a blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo parked outside the Hibbs home, facing the wrong direction, sometime around the estimated time of the crime. These details formed the initial foundation of the investigation, offering early clues and setting the framework for what would become a decades-long search for answers. In the months leading up to Joy Hibbs' death, the family experienced several disturbing incidents that disrupted their sense of safety. Someone threw a brick through one of their windows. On another occasion, Joy's car tires were slashed. The back door of their house was also kicked in. These acts of vandalism were not random. They appeared targeted and deliberate, leaving Joy anxious and increasingly fearful. When investigators questioned 12-year-old David Hibbs about who might have had a reason to harm his mother, one name came to mind: Robert Atkins. Robert had been a former neighbor, living just a few houses away from the Hibbs residence. He was known in the neighborhood as a small-time drug dealer, and David remembered him for his explosive temper. It was the kind of temper that could be heard from the Atkins home all the way down the street. Robert's wife, April, had formed a friendship with Joy and frequently visited with her child. Despite this outward friendliness, tensions eventually surfaced. Just weeks before Joy's death, she had a heated phone call with Robert. She and Charlie had purchased marijuana from him, but were unhappy with the quality. Joy called to return it. During that call, which David overheard, Robert became enraged and issued threats. Although Robert and April had moved about 8 miles away by the time of the murder, Robert's volatile behavior, the recent argument, and his potential motive made him a person of interest. He drove a black Monte Carlo. Not the blue one seen near the Hibbs house, but the match in make and model was notable. Robert claimed he had been at home and later left for a vacation in the Poconos. Despite these red flags, authorities dismissed him early in the investigation. This decision, based on limited distinctions and unverified assumptions, marked a significant misstep in the early handling of the case and allowed a potentially critical lead to go unexplored. In the absence of strong leads, investigators turned their attention to someone close to the victim, Charlie Hibbs, Joy's husband. On the day of Joy's murder, Charlie had been working in Philadelphia, approximately 20 miles from their Bristol Township home. He was on a construction site, surrounded by co-workers who could vouch for his presence throughout the day. Despite having a verifiable alibi, Charlie willingly cooperated with law enforcement. He participated in multiple police interviews and agreed to take 3 polygraph tests. Still, suspicion lingered. With no arrests made and no clear evidence pointing elsewhere, investigators began to treat Charlie as their primary suspect. This shift in focus had lasting consequences. For years, Charlie lived under the weight of unproven allegations, casting a long shadow over his life and his family. Friends and neighbors grew distant. Internally, the family struggled to make sense of the ongoing scrutiny directed at a man they believed to be innocent. The lack of progress in the case was deeply frustrating. David Hibbs, now older, voiced his frustration publicly. In an interview with the Huffington Post, he accused police of mishandling the investigation and failing to pursue critical leads. The impact of being miscast in a role he did not play left Charlie emotionally drained and socially isolated. This section underscores how investigative missteps and tunnel vision can prolong suffering for victims' families. By placing undue focus on Charlie, authorities may have missed opportunities to pursue more viable leads, delaying justice and compounding the grief of an already devastated family. The emotional toll on the Hibbs family was profound, and the case remained cold for more than 2 decades until a new investigator brought fresh eyes to the evidence. In 2014, over 2 decades after the murder of Joy Hibbs, Sergeant Mike Slaughter was assigned to the cold case. From the outset, Slaughter approached the investigation with fresh eyes and a commitment to re-examining every piece of available evidence. What he uncovered early on was troubling. Several original detectives were unwilling to discuss the case. Even more alarming, Slaughter learned that investigators had been directed to avoid pursuing Robert Atkins as a suspect because he had been working as a police drug informant at the time of the murder. Slaughter began with a thorough review of the case. He found no credible evidence implicating Charlie Hibbs and formally cleared him as a suspect. Then, he turned his attention back to Robert Atkins. As he retraced the original investigation, he noticed discrepancies in Robert's alibi. Robert claimed he had answered a phone call at home on the day of the murder before leaving for a family trip to the Poconos. However, the caller believed the conversation may have occurred as late as 1:30 p.m. after the estimated time of the crime. Slaughter also discovered that Robert had access to a blue Monte Carlo owned by his grandmother, which aligned with the vehicle seen near the Hibbs home on the day of the murder. The critical breakthrough came in 2016. April Atkins, now divorced from Robert, came forward and revealed that Robert had returned home on the day of the murder covered in blood. She recalled him saying, "I stabbed somebody and lit a house on fire." April explained that fear and years of abuse had kept her silent. This new testimony transformed the case. Slaughter's efforts revealed not only fresh leads, but also systemic issues in the original investigation, where protecting an informant had seemingly taken precedence over solving a murder. It was the beginning of long-delayed progress toward justice for Joy Hibbs. In May 2022, more than 30 years after the brutal murder of Joy Hibbs, Robert Atkins was indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder, arson, and robbery. The arrest marked a dramatic turn in a case that had remained unresolved for decades. What had once been a cold case clouded by missteps and missed opportunities was finally moving toward resolution. Robert elected to waive a jury trial in favor of a bench trial, which began in 2024. Prosecutors presented their case built on a combination of circumstantial evidence and powerful testimony. They argued that Robert had killed Joy following a dispute over a $20 marijuana transaction, then set the fire in a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence of the crime. The prosecution relied heavily on April Atkins' account, her chilling recollection of Robert coming home covered in blood and confessing to the stabbing and arson. The timeline also supported the case. The window of time between the church visit and the fire's ignition matched Robert's unaccounted movements. Additionally, the revelation that he had access to a blue Monte Carlo, similar to the one seen near the Hibbs home, further reinforced the state's argument. Ultimately, the judge found Robert Atkins guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Joy Hibbs, along with an additional 30 years for setting the fire. For the Hibbs family, the verdict brought long-awaited closure to a decades-long nightmare. There's still a big hole in my heart, but I felt justice for Joy. Finally, Charlie Hibbs said after the trial, his words reflected the emotional weight of a case that had haunted his family for over 3 decades, and the relief that truth and persistence had finally prevailed. Elizabeth Salgado was 26 years old when she arrived in Provo, Utah in March 2015. Originally from Chiapas, Mexico, Elizabeth had recently completed a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Driven by ambition and a desire for personal growth, she chose to continue her journey by studying English in the United States. Provo, known for its strong religious roots and reputation as a peaceful, tight-knit community, seemed like the perfect place to build the future she envisioned. Elizabeth enrolled in classes and quickly settled into a new routine. She moved into the Branberry Apartments, located at 449 West, 1720 North, where she shared her space with roommates. She was known for her punctuality and dependability, consistently attending her English classes and working a part-time job at a local restaurant. Those who knew her described her as focused and optimistic, someone who was determined to succeed. Communication was a constant priority for Elizabeth. Despite the distance, she maintained frequent contact with her family in Mexico, exchanging messages regularly with her mother, siblings, and extended relatives. Her relationships with her roommates were also reportedly positive, and she appeared to be adapting well to life in a new country. Nothing about her behavior suggested anything unusual or concerning. She had clear goals: to learn English fluently, expand her opportunities, and create a better life for herself through education and faith. Her decision to relocate was thoughtful and purposeful, reflecting both her personal values and long-term aspirations. In Provo, she saw hope, opportunity, and stability. Elizabeth's life in Utah had only just begun. She had taken the first steps toward a brighter future, surrounded by a community that shared her beliefs and supported her dreams. But within weeks, everything would change. On April 16, 2015, Elizabeth Salgado followed her usual routine. After attending her English classes in Provo, Utah, she began her walk back to the Branbury Apartments, where she lived with roommates. Sometime during her return, she sent brief messages to both her sister and her uncle. Those texts were received, but what followed was immediate and deeply alarming. There were no replies from Elizabeth. She did not follow up, she did not call, and she did not arrive home. This silence was not only unusual, it was entirely out of character. Elizabeth had always maintained steady communication with her family in Mexico. Whether through text or calls, she was consistent, reliable, and emotionally connected. When her relatives noticed that their replies went unanswered, concern began to rise. The unease grew quickly when further attempts to reach her also failed. Her mother, unable to get in touch, became increasingly worried. Elizabeth's sudden silence, especially after texting loved ones, triggered immediate alarm. The family knew something was wrong. It was not a missed call or a forgotten message. It was a complete disappearance without explanation. She had vanished in broad daylight, just blocks away from home, during what should have been a routine walk. Her absence was quickly reported to the authorities. Police in Provo were contacted, and an official missing person case was opened. What began as a day like any other had turned into a mystery within hours. The normal rhythm of Elizabeth's life had abruptly stopped. There were no signs, no warnings, no clues in those final messages. Just two unanswered texts, and then silence. This was the last confirmed communication from Elizabeth. From that moment on, she was gone. Her family's hope began to waver, replaced by the growing fear that something had gone terribly wrong. Following Elizabeth Salgado's sudden disappearance on April 16, 2015, the Provo Police Department launched an intensive search effort. From the beginning, authorities worked closely with Elizabeth's family, both in Utah and in Mexico. Given her recent arrival in the United States and her strong ties to both communities, the case gained swift attention. Local residents joined in the efforts. Flyers were distributed. Search parties were organized, and volunteers combed nearby neighborhoods and wooded areas. Elizabeth's family, desperate for answers, reached out to local media to raise awareness. Police held multiple press conferences appealing for public assistance. They emphasized the urgency of the situation and encouraged anyone with information to come forward. In an effort to prompt tips, a reward was offered for any lead that could help solve the case. The investigation did not stop at state lines. Authorities also collaborated with officials in Mexico, exploring every possible angle, including any connections Elizabeth may have maintained abroad. Her consistent communication with family meant her sudden silence had no reasonable explanation. Investigators treated it as a serious and suspicious disappearance from the start. 3 weeks after Elizabeth vanished, a significant development seemed to emerge. Human remains were discovered, raising immediate concern. For her family, it was a moment of intense dread. The fear that their worst nightmare had come true hung heavily in the air. However, when dental records were examined, it was determined that the remains did not belong to Elizabeth. Despite this temporary relief, the investigation grew increasingly frustrating. Days turned into weeks, and leads began to dry up. Every new tip seemed to lead to another dead end. Public interest remained high, but the case had hit a standstill. The Provo community, once filled with hope for a swift resolution, now faced the sobering reality that Elizabeth's disappearance was becoming a mystery. With no witnesses, no credible sightings, and no physical evidence, the search entered a difficult phase. The intense involvement from police and the public had not produced the answers everyone hoped for. By the summer of 2015, the case had stalled, marked by uncertainty and the haunting question of what had happened to Elizabeth Salgado. In May 2018, 3 years after Elizabeth Salgado vanished without a trace, a grim discovery brought new and devastating answers. A man had pulled over near Hobble Creek Canyon, approximately 15 miles from Elizabeth's last known location in Provo. Stepping into the brush to relieve himself, he came across human skeletal remains. Authorities were quickly alerted, and the Utah County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. Forensic analysis began immediately, with samples sent for DNA testing. The results confirmed what her family had feared for years. The remains belonged to Elizabeth Salgado, The confirmation ended a long period of painful uncertainty, replacing it with the heartbreaking finality of death. The area where Elizabeth's body was found had never been searched during the initial investigation. At the time of her disappearance, there had been no indication to explore that direction. The canyon's remote location and lack of any known connection to Elizabeth meant it was not considered priority in the early stages. Her remains had been exposed to the elements for 3 years, making forensic analysis extremely difficult. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the medical examiner was unable to determine a definitive cause of death. However, investigators stated they believe Elizabeth had been the victim of a homicide, killed by violent means. The condition of the remains and the secluded location supported this assumption, though no weapon or clear evidence was found nearby. One fact stood out clearly: Elizabeth did not drive, and she did not own a car. Hobble Creek Canyon was far beyond walking distance from her apartment or school. Authorities concluded that she had been transported to the area, likely against her will. This detail narrowed the possibilities and shifted the focus of the investigation. The discovery closed one chapter, but opened another. It confirmed that Elizabeth had been murdered, but it raised new questions. Who had taken her and why? For her family and the community, the location and circumstances of her death only deepened the pain. The hope of finding her alive was gone. The search for justice had now fully begun. In July 2019, more than a year after Elizabeth Salgado's remains were discovered in Hobble Creek Canyon, investigators returned to the site with metal detectors. The area remained a point of interest due to its remote nature and the unresolved questions surrounding how Elizabeth had ended up there. While scanning the brush and surrounding terrain, investigators made an unexpected discovery: a coin. What made the find notable was the location itself. Hobble Creek Canyon was not a frequented hiking area, and certainly not a place where casual visitors were expected. The presence of a small object like a coin in such an isolated spot raised immediate suspicions. Investigators treated it as potentially significant. The coin was subjected to forensic testing. Remarkably, technicians were able to extract a full DNA profile from its surface. The DNA belonged to an unidentified male. This became one of the most promising pieces of forensic evidence in the case. Investigators turned to GEDmatch, a public genetic genealogy database that had been instrumental in solving other cold cases, including the high-profile Golden State Killer case. Through GEDmatch, authorities hoped to find a relative or match that could lead them to the individual whose DNA was found on the coin. Despite the potential, the lead did not yield a breakthrough. No relatives or exact matches could be identified, and the unknown male remained unidentified. While the discovery of the coin was a rare and hopeful moment in an otherwise stagnant case, it ultimately led to a dead end. The coin remains in evidence, its origins and connection to Elizabeth's murder unresolved. It stands as a silent clue, one that holds answers investigators have yet to unlock. In August 2021, the Salgado family faced a second devastating ordeal. Miriam Salgado, the Aunt Elizabeth Salgado, was reported missing. The circumstances were unsettling from the beginning. Shortly after her disappearance, her vehicle was located, abandoned, in Washington County, Utah, not far from Zion National Park. Despite immediate concern from her family and local authorities, Miriam could not be found. For months, there were no answers. Then, in March 2023, nearly a year and a half later, human remains were discovered less than half a mile from where Miriam's vehicle had been located. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains were hers. The location and condition of the remains provided few clues. The police stated publicly that there was no conclusive evidence pointing to foul play in Miriam's death. However, they emphasized that the investigation was not closed and that nothing had been definitively ruled out. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance and proximity of her remains to her abandoned car left many questions unanswered. The Salgado family, still grieving the unsolved murder of Elizabeth, now faced another loss under unclear circumstances. They acknowledged that Miriam had struggled with psychological issues in the past, which added a layer of complexity to the investigation. While no official cause of death was released, the case remained open as authorities continued to evaluate the limited evidence available. Though Miriam's case was distinct from Elizabeth's, The emotional impact on the family was profound. Two members of the same family, both gone, each under tragic and unresolved circumstances. The connection between their fates, if any, remained unknown. For the Salgado family, it marked another painful chapter in a story already marked by loss, unanswered questions, and enduring grief. In 2023, a renewed investigation effort brought a possible lead back into focus. Jason Jensen, a private investigator hired by the Salgado family, made a public appeal that reignited hope in the search for answers about Elizabeth Salgado's murder. His appeal centered around a church event held just days before Elizabeth went missing, a gathering that took place in Kelly's Grove Park, located near the base of Hobble Creek Canyon. According to information gathered during the private investigation, Elizabeth was believed to have attended this church function. Reports suggested that she was possibly seen spending time with someone she had made plans with. Specifically, a picnic that may have been arranged for the day of her disappearance. While these details had not surfaced publicly during the initial stages of the investigation, Jensen viewed them as critical and worth further exploration. Jensen's public message urged anyone who had attended the church event at Kelly's Grove to review any photographs or video footage they might still have from that day. He appealed particularly to young people who had been present at the gathering, emphasizing that even the smallest detail, a background face, a timestamp, or a brief interaction, could prove vital to understanding Elizabeth's final known movements. This focused effort marked a significant development in a case that had gone years without a meaningful breakthrough. It was not a theory or a speculation, but a factual lead tied to a specific place and time. The Salgado family hoped that someone, even unknowingly, might be holding a piece of information that could unlock a larger truth. Despite the passing years, the family's determination remained strong. The appeal represented their ongoing fight for justice and their refusal to let Elizabeth's case fade into silence. It was a call to remember, to revisit, and to respond. Elizabeth Elena Laguna Salgado's case remains open. Despite years of investigation, the involvement of local authorities, the FBI, and private investigators, her murder has not been solved. There have been no arrests, and no suspects have been publicly named. Her family, along with law enforcement, continues to plead with the public. If you know anything, even something you think is insignificant, now is the time to come forward. A dedicated form has been made available for anonymous tips. This submission tool is operated not by the police but by the editorial team handling the case. It allows individuals to share information without revealing their identity. Anyone with even the smallest memory, observation, or detail is encouraged to reach out. The appeal is clear. Do not hesitate. Do not assume your information is useless. It may be the missing piece investigators need. The toll on the Salgado family has been immense. What began as a hopeful journey, a 26-year-old woman arriving in Provo, Utah, dreaming of a better future, ended in a tragedy that remains unresolved. Elizabeth came to the United States with ambition, faith, and determination. Instead, she was met with violence, silence, and a mystery that continues to haunt those who knew and loved her. Today, the call for justice remains as strong as ever. The family's message is unwavering. Someone out there knows something. If that someone is you, now is the time to act. Whether you were a witness, an attendee at a church event, or simply recall seeing something unusual, your voice matters. Help bring peace to a family that has waited far too long for answers. Help give justice to a life that was taken too soon.